The UN says at least 798 people have been killed near aid sites in Gaza since the end of May. The sites are run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which disputes those numbers. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu is heading back to Israel, from the U.S. without announcing a ceasefire deal. He says Israel will use even more force in Gaza if Hamas does not agree to lay down its weapons and give up any governmental or military capabilities. Now Hamas is responding, blaming Netanyahu for holding up the deal. ABC News Chief International Correspondent James Longman has the latest on all that. Hi, James. So what's happening now with these killings at the aid sites in Gaza? What's this report saying?
Yeah, it's just horrific, Diane. I mean, day in, day out, we get reports of scores being killed at these aid sites. There's been a breakdown in trust, basically, between the Israelis and the United Nations. That's gone on for some time. Israel says that Hamas has been able to co-opt food and aid distribution inside Gaza, and so they wanted a different mechanism. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was then introduced. This is a US-backed initiative, but it employs basically private contractors. These are armed contractors who man these sites, but there is no transparency, there is certainly no accountability, and from what we can tell, there's been mayhem, pandemonium at most of these sites. That number, 798 people killed trying to access aid. The United Nations says the vast majority of those trying to get aid from these aid sites. Israel does not allow international journalists into Gaza. We have to rely on our local producer there, Sami, and his team who try to get to these sites. They tell us it's complete chaos. And so it just goes on day after day after day. The GHF, as you say, has said that this is not the case and that they have to be the ones responsible for this aid distribution. But we just see these numbers climbing every single day. And then that's in addition to the threat, the danger that exists every day from airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. Just yesterday we heard about a strike near a clinic. We saw a very, very distressing video of women and children lying dead in the street. The IDF, Israel, says they're trying to target Hamas, but this has been the ongoing story of this war, the enormous collateral damage that these airstrikes cause. The IDF on this occasion is saying that they regret this instance of so many civilians being killed, but this is something we see every single day. And that is why, for the people of Gaza, a ceasefire is so necessary. But unfortunately, after so much was made in the last week about the possibility of a ceasefire being very close, Netanyahu left Washington, D.C. very quietly without that deal. And we're still no closer to knowing when it's going to happen.
And you kind of took my next question, James, in terms of we keep hearing so close to a deal. I think the last numbers were 80 or 90% there. So is there a sense of what's holding it up?
Yeah, so Steve Witkoff, the special envoy for the Middle East, he's on his way to Doha, may even be there now. One imagines if he's going to be there at these conversations in Doha, the Israelis and Hamas are in the same hotel. They're not having direct negotiations, but the go-betweens literally go between the rooms to try to hammer out these issues. One imagines if he's going to be there, then they must be close. But the main issue, as far as we can tell, is the issue around what happens when a ceasefire comes to an end. Hamas wants, at the beginning of the conversation, they want the deal to be, after that 60-day period, then peace, then the end of the war. The Israelis say, no, we will start the 60 days, and during that time, we will then negotiate how this war ends. So it sounds like a subtle difference, but it is fundamental, and it goes to the fundamental contradiction of this entire process. On the one hand, Israel says they want to see the end of Hamas as a military force, as a social force, as a governing force in Gaza, and yet they are negotiating with Hamas. And so that is the roadblock that they keep coming into. Yes, 80 to 90% of the way through, but as long as we're not at 100%, there is no deal. Diane.
All right. James, also senior Israeli officials say some of Iran's 60% enriched uranium may have survived last month's U.S. and Israeli strikes. What does that mean for Iran's ability to make a nuclear weapon?
Well, if we're to believe Donald Trump, their ability to actually make a nuclear weapon, and for that you need these centrifuges, has been obliterated because we saw that extraordinary US attack on those nuclear sites inside Iran. And as far as the Americans were concerned, they completely obliterated the Iranian ability to make nuclear weapons. What's important here is whether or not there's uranium, enriched uranium, which is obviously fundamental to the process. Now, it could be that that uranium is somewhere under Isfahan, which is one of these targets, but no one knows Iran better than the Israelis, and they are watching, and they want the Americans to give them permission to go in again if they feel like Iran is going after that enriched uranium. Diane?
Chief International Correspondent James Longman. James, thank you.